The eviction notice had been on the refrigerator for 11 days before Marlene finally took it down. She folded it twice, pressed it into the junk drawer between the takeout menus and the dead batteries, and told herself she would deal with it on Friday when the Fenwick Road job paid out. Friday was 4 days away. The rent was 9 days past due, and her landlord Gerald Fitch had left 2 voicemails she had not returned. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to. Marcus was asleep. Jasmine was in her room with headphones on, which meant she had either finished her homework or given up on it. And Marlene was not going to ask, which because some battles could not be fought on a Thursday night with a sink full of dishes and $42 in the checking account. She sat at the kitchen table with the job listings open on her laptop. The laptop was old enough that the fan rattled when it ran, and the battery only held charge if she kept the cord plugged in at exactly the right angle. She had been meaning to replace it for 2 years. The phone rang at 9:17. She almost did not answer. The number was a 614 area code, but not one she recognized, and at that hour, unknown numbers usually meant robocalls or bill collectors, and she had enough of both. But she answered it anyway, because the alternative was sitting there watching the cursor blink on a job board that had nothing new since Tuesday. Is this the estate clearance service? A man's voice, flat and clipped, with the particular impatience of someone accustomed to delegating. Yes, Marlene Okafor, Okafor Estate Services. Gerald Voss. My aunt passed away in Carver's Mill 2 weeks ago. I need someone to clear the house. I'm in Atlanta. I can't get up there, and the real estate agent says the property won't move until the place is emptied. Marlene pulled a notepad toward her. What's the address? 41 Sycamore Lane. For bedrooms, 2 floors. From what Brenda tells me, the woman lived there her whole life and never got rid of a thing. A pause with a faint edge of disgust in it. I'm not expecting valuables. She was eccentric. Everyone in town knew it. Probably just boxes of newspapers and old clothes. I'd need to assess the property before I can give you a firm number. I don't have time for assessments. I'll pay $500 cash to have the place cleared and swept by the end of the month. Whatever you find inside is yours to keep or sell. I just need the house empty. $500. Not enough, not really, not for a full 4-bedroom house with 40-plus years of accumulation. But $500 was what stood between her and the conversation with the kids about why they were packing up and moving in with Aunt Diane. And that conversation was not one she was ready to have. She wrote down the address. I'll be there Saturday. Fine. He hung up without saying goodbye. Marlene sat for a moment with the notepad in front of her. Carver's Mill was 2 hours east, out in Licking County, deep in farm country where the towns had one stoplight and everybody knew what their neighbors had for dinner. She pulled it up on her laptop. Population 1,400. Incorporated 1847. A single main street of brick storefronts, half of them empty. She looked at the eviction notice inside her memory, still visible even folded away in the junk drawer. $500 and whatever she could sell. That was the equation. She went to bed. Saturday came cold and wet. She loaded her van before 6, working in the dark with the kids still asleep, stacking collapsible boxes and garbage bags and her rolling cart in the cargo area while the neighbor's motion light flickered on and off across the alley. Jasmine appeared in the doorway at 6:15 in her pajamas, squinting at the gray morning. You're going by yourself? Always do. Marcus wants pancakes. There are frozen waffles. Read the box. There are instructions. Jasmine made the face she had been perfecting since she was 12, a look that communicated the full weight of her disapproval without requiring words. Marlene had learned to absorb it without flinching. I'll be back Sunday night, Marlene said. Paulette's number is on the counter. Don't order food, there's stuff in the freezer. And make sure Marcus does his reading. She kissed Jasmine's forehead despite the face, got in the van, and drove east as the sky went from black to a flat Midwestern gray that showed no intention of improving. She stopped for gas and coffee in Heath and pulled into Carver's Mill at 8:40. Main Street was mostly closed on a Saturday morning. A hardware store, a diner with 4 trucks out front, a pharmacy with a hand-lettered sign in the window advertising seasonal allergy medication. The kind of town where nothing was ever urgent because nothing was ever expected to change. Sycamore Lane was 3 blocks off Main, a residential street of old craftsman houses and American elms that had mostly survived the blight. Number 41 was at the end of the cul-de-sac, set back from the road behind a front yard that had not been tended with intention in years. Not abandoned. The grass was long but not dead, and someone at some point had planted things with care. A Japanese maple near the porch that had gone untrimmed, a line of boxwoods along the front walk that had grown together into one continuous dense mass. The house itself was bigger than she had expected. 2 stories, brick and board and batten siding, a covered porch running the full width of the front. Old windows, the wavy glass kind that were original to the structure. The paint was faded but not peeling badly. The foundation looked solid. Brenda Hollis was waiting by the front door. She was maybe 50, in a quilted vest and low heels that were a poor choice for the damp grass, holding a manila folder and looking at Marlene's van with the expression of someone trying to determine whether it was reliable. Marlene Okafor. Her handshake was firm. Gerald said you'd be coming. I only have a few minutes. I've got an open house in Newark at 10. She produced a key from the folder. The estate attorney cleared you for access. Everything inside goes to you. Whatever you can't sell gets disposed of. The one condition is the property has to be empty before the 28th. What can you tell me about the woman who lived here? Brenda's expression shifted into something careful. Eleanor Voss, 84, lived here since the 1960s. She was a private person. Didn't have friends in town, not really. Went to the grocery once a week, paid cash for everything, never borrowed anything and never lent anything. She paused. People around here thought she was strange. She never talked about herself, where she came from, what she'd done before she arrived in Carver's Mill. Even the nephew didn't really know her. Any family? Not that anyone knew of. Gerald is all that's left, and he only found out he was in the will because the attorney tracked him down. She handed over the key. I've been inside once, a walkthrough for the listing assessment. It's full. She kept everything. But it's not what you'd call a hoarder situation. It's more like a museum nobody curated. Marlene looked at the house. Structural problems? Roof was redone in 2018. We can confirm that from permits. HVAC is old but functional. Gutters were cleaned last fall. Brenda checked her watch. Gerald said not to expect much of value in there. She didn't have money. She dressed like it was still 1972 and drove a 1994 Buick that's still in the garage. Classic eccentric small-town recluse. She was already moving toward her car. The attorney's number is in the folder if you need anything. Good luck. She drove away and left Marlene standing in front of the house with the key in her hand and the wet grass soaking through the sides of her work boots. The front door opened into a small foyer and then into a living room that stopped her in the doorway. Not because of mess, because of order. The room was full, yes. Shelves on every wall, boxes stacked in corners, furniture placed wherever it had fit, a lifetime of objects compressed into the space of a modest Midwestern living room. But nothing was piled randomly. Everything had been placed with intention. Books organized by size and then by the color of their spines. Framed photographs arranged in rows, each one level with the next, each one cleared of dust within recent memory. A cabinet with glass doors held a collection of glass birds grouped by color, blues together, greens together, clears and whites arranged at the top. The smell was cedar and something else. Something she could not identify right away. Chemical, faintly sweet, not unpleasant. It would take her a full day to place it. The residual odor of darkroom chemicals, the kind that clung to old photographs developed by hand in a home lab. She stood in the doorway for a moment, just taking it in. She had been in enough dead people's houses to have developed a feel for what the contents said about the person who had left them behind. The Fenwick Road man had left a house full of anxiety, newspapers stacked for the certainty that he would need them later, duplicates of everything in case the first one broke, supplies for emergencies that never arrived. The woman in Gehanna last spring had left a house full of love, every surface covered with photos of grandchildren, cards from holidays still pinned to a kitchen corkboard, dried flowers from some occasion important enough to preserve. Eleanor Voss had left a house full of secrecy. That was the word that arrived in Marlene's mind as she walked through the first floor. The photographs on the walls showed no people she could identify. Landscapes, mostly. Fields and mountains, and the architectural details of buildings she did not recognize. A few group shots of people in old-fashioned clothes she could not date more precisely than somewhere in the middle of the 20th century. The people in the photos were unlabeled, but someone had written on the backs. She checked one frame, tilting it away from the wall. Names. Dates. In German. In the kitchen, a calendar from 2019 was pinned to the wall near the refrigerator. Every appointment written on it had been crossed off as it passed. Dr. Hearn, 2 p.m. Thursday. Pickup RX. Dentist. A woman who checked off her appointments. Who tracked things. Who did not let things slide. On the counter beside the sink was a coffee can full of twist ties, sorted by color. Red ones on the left. White ones in the center. Blue ones on the right. She stood looking at that can for longer than made sense. This was not a woman who did not think. This was not a woman who let things happen to her. She went back to the van and brought in her supplies and started the process that was the same in every house. A preliminary walkthrough, room by room, documenting what was there before she touched anything. She had learned this from a job 3 years ago where she had accidentally thrown away a roll of cash a man had hidden inside a sock, and the family had blamed her for it. Now she photographed everything with her phone before she moved anything. The ground floor held the living room, the kitchen, a small dining room, a half bath, and a room used as a home office. The second floor was 4 bedrooms, 1 full bathroom, and a narrow linen closet. The basement she checked from the doorway. Concrete floor, furnace, water heater, shelves of canning jars filled with vegetables put up years ago. The home office held a heavy oak secretary desk, the kind with a drop front writing surface and a hutch above it. She photographed it before she opened anything. Behind the desk's checkbook, pushed toward the back of the writing surface, was a small accordion file held shut with an elastic band. Inside the accordion file were receipts. Hundreds of them, going back to 1992, sorted by year. Not receipts for household goods or groceries or the ordinary purchases of a life. Receipts for storage unit payments. The same facility, Secure Store, Route 16 East, Carver's Mill, Ohio, billed annually. The most recent receipt was from this past January, 2 months before Eleanor died. Paid in cash, as the handwritten notation confirmed. She set the accordion file on the corner of the desk and kept moving. In the dining room, she found 9 pressed wildflowers in frames, arranged in a careful grid on one wall. She lifted one frame to carry it to the assessing pile and found the back sealed with a layer of brown paper that had been glued down around all 4 edges. Not the usual thin backing paper. A seal, deliberately applied. She set it back on the wall and stood for a moment. Then she went back to work. She broke for lunch in the van with the heat running, eating a sandwich she had made the night before and scrolling through her phone. A text from Jasmine. Marcus spilled orange juice on the couch. A voicemail from her sister Diane that she played while she ate. Marlene, call me back. I heard you took another one of those house-clearing jobs, and I have to be honest with you. I don't understand the logic. You drive 2 hours, you do a week of heavy lifting, and you come home with a few $100s and somebody's old furniture. You have a master's degree. Do you know how many jobs are posted right now that pay 3 times what you make doing this? I'm not trying to be critical. I just worry about you. Call me. She deleted the voicemail. Her sister was not wrong that she had a master's degree. She was also not right that it was simple. The degree was in art history, which was the kind of credential that opened a specific narrow set of doors, most of which required you to already know the right people. And Marlene had spent 10 years learning that she did not know the right people. What she knew was how to look at objects and understand what they were. How to walk into a room full of a dead person's things and find the thread that ran through all of it. It was not nothing. It was, in fact, the only thing she was unambiguously good at. She finished her sandwich and went back inside. She was in the master bedroom, working through the dresser drawer by drawer, when she found the box. It was under the bed. Not hidden. Exactly. Pushed back toward the wall the way you might push something simply because it belonged in the room but had nowhere else to go. She found it when she lifted the bed skirt to check what was underneath, which was standard practice. People put things under beds. Usually shoeboxes, extra blankets, things that did not fit in the closet. What was under Eleanor Voss's bed was a single object. A painted steel case, roughly the size of a small suitcase but shallower, painted in a dark institutional green applied with a brush rather than a spray gun, leaving visible brushstrokes in the surface. It had 2 carrying handles made of leather that had dried and cracked with age. In the center of the lid, where a padlock hasp would normally be, there was instead a recessed barrel lock, the kind that required a specific key, the kind that resisted picking, set flush into the steel. She pulled it out from under the bed and set it on the floor and looked at it. Heavy. Not impossibly heavy, but heavy enough that she had to use both hands and adjust her grip. Maybe 30 pounds. Maybe a little more. She photographed it from 4 angles. She photographed the lock close up, the leather handles, the brush strokes in the paint, and a faint series of letters and numbers stamped into the underside of one handle. GW 49/EKH. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a while. The receipts for the storage unit. The sealed backs on the framed pressed flowers. The photographs with German writing on the backs. The 43 pairs of identical shoes she had counted in the closet. The coffee can of twist ties sorted by color. Eleanor Voss had been a woman who kept everything in its place. A woman who did not let things accumulate by accident. Every object in this house was where it was for a reason. The closet had made this clearer than anything else on the floor. Beside the shoes, on the upper shelf, there were hat boxes, 12 of them in a row, each one labeled in Eleanor's hand with a year. The earliest was from 1962, the most recent from 2011. She had not opened any of them yet, just photographed the labels and the order and the fact that they were there, a row of sealed boxes going back 60 years, organized with a logic she could feel without yet being able to read. And she had kept this case under her bed for decades. Marlene tried the lock. It did not move. She looked for a key. She went through the dresser completely, then the nightstand, then the closet shelf, the top of the bookcase in the corner of the room, a small jewelry box that held a modest collection of rings and brooches. She went back downstairs and checked the secretary desk, the kitchen junk drawer, the entry hall table. She looked in the coffee can of twist ties in case the key was buried among them. No key. She came back to the master bedroom and sat on the floor beside the case. GW 49/EKH. She photographed the stamp again and spent 20 minutes searching it online. Nothing definitive came up, but the format was consistent with European military or institutional property markings from the middle of the 20th century. The kind of marking you put on equipment that belonged to an organization, not a person. She thought about what Brenda had said, that Eleanor had been in Carver's Mill since the 1960s, that no one knew where she had come from before. She thought about the photographs with German writing on the backs. She thought about the darkroom smell that was present in every room. By 4 in the afternoon, she had cleared the living room of portable items and started on the bookshelves. Slow work because she was still documenting before moving anything, and the books needed to be opened and assessed one by one. She stacked anything that looked potentially sellable near the front door. Most of the books were in German, which meant she could not assess their content, only their condition. At 4:30, a knock at the front door. She opened it to find an old man, maybe 80, in a barn coat and a knit cap, holding a casserole dish covered with aluminum foil. Short, wide-shouldered, with the kind of hands that had worked outdoors most of a long life. Ray Tillman. I live 2 houses down. I heard someone was here. He held up the casserole dish. My wife made it a habit for 50 years. Whenever there was a death on the street, we brought food. She's been gone 3 years now, but I still do it. Keeps her in practice, if that makes sense. Marlene took the dish. I'm Marlene. I'm doing the estate clearance. From Columbus? Yes. I was afraid they'd send someone like that. He said it without unkindness. Someone who didn't know Eleanor. Did you know her? He considered the question carefully. 30 years of being her neighbor. I knew her the way you know a tree. I saw her every day. I could tell you what she looked like in every season, but I could not tell you what was inside. Was she friendly? Quiet. She would wave. She would help if you needed help. Once, when my wife fell in the driveway in winter, Eleanor was out there before I had my boots on, helping her up, keeping her warm until the ambulance came. But she did not come to block parties. She did not go to church. She did not eat at the diner. He looked past Marlene at the interior of the house, at the cleared living room and the boxes staged near the wall. She was not from here. She came from somewhere and never talked about it, and after enough years people stopped asking. Did she ever mention family? No. In 30 years, I never saw a visitor. Never saw a letter that looked personal, only bill mail. Never heard her on the phone. He paused. Once, maybe 15 years ago, I was close enough to the window when I walked past. I was not trying to look in. The light was just right, and I could see her at her desk. Writing. She was crying. Just sitting there writing and crying. I did not know why. It was not my business, so I kept walking. Marlene held the casserole dish and looked at him. She did not die in pain, Ray Tillman said. The coroner said it was cardiac. Quick. She was in her bedroom. He nodded toward the upstairs. I hope it was quick. She was a private woman, and she deserved a private death. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the porch boards. Then, there was one thing. One time, maybe 10 years back, I saw a car in her driveway, blue, out-of-state plates. I couldn't say which state. Only there for about an hour. Man in a dark coat knocked on her door, went inside, came out 45 minutes later carrying nothing, and drove away. She never mentioned it. Never said she had a visitor. But I saw her watching that car leave from her front window, and her face looked like a person who had just passed some kind of test. He tucked his hands in his jacket pockets. Seemed odd to mention at the time. Seems less odd now. He walked back down the porch steps, pulling his cap down against the wind. Marlene watched him go, then went back inside with the casserole. She worked until 7 and then allowed herself to stop, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of whatever Ray Tillman's wife had made, chicken and rice, thick and good, and her notebook open in front of her. She had written down everything that struck her during the course of the day. The German writing on the photographs, the darkroom smell, the sealed-back frames, the storage unit receipts going back 30 years, the institutional property marking on the case, the 43 pairs of identical shoes. She was not, professionally, supposed to care about any of this. Her job was to clear the house, box it up, sell what sold, dump what did not, sweep the floor, go home. $500. She needed $500, and she needed to get back to her kids by Sunday night. She ate her dinner and looked at the notebook. The useful thing about art history, the thing that had never led to a career but had never left her, was that it trained you to read the space between things. To understand that what was absent was as telling as what was present. Eleanor Voss had no family photographs. She had photographs of landscapes and buildings and groups of strangers with German names on the backs, but she had no pictures of parents, no school pictures, no wedding photos, nothing that said this is my life, and these are the people in it. A woman of 84 would ordinarily have those things. The absence was a fact. She went upstairs after she ate and sat on the floor of the master bedroom again, beside the green-painted case, looking at it. She had a lock-picking set in her van. She had bought it 2 years ago after the Fenwick Road family accused her of stealing their hidden cash, thinking that if she could demonstrate she could open things without keys, she could prove she had not destroyed anything in the search. She had practiced with it maybe a dozen times since and was not skilled, but the lock on this case was an older type, and older mechanisms were sometimes more forgiving than newer ones. She went to the van and got the kit. She worked on the lock for 40 minutes by the light of her phone. The bedroom had gone fully dark, and she sat cross-legged on the floor with the case between her knees, working methodically through the tension wrench and pick options, listening for the slight changes in resistance that told her a tumbler was moving. This was the kind of patience she had in abundance. Patience for things that mattered. At 8:22 by her phone clock, something shifted. She held very still, applied gentle pressure to the tension wrench, felt the resistance change, heard the faint sound of a barrel lock rotating. The lid lifted. She sat with both hands resting on the open lid and did not look inside right away. There was a thing that happened in this work sometimes, rare, maybe 4 or 5 times in all the years she had been doing it. A moment just before the looking, when everything that was about to change was still in its before state, and she could feel the weight of it without yet knowing its shape. She had felt it once before a fire safe that held a family's entire cash savings. Once before a cedar chest that held letters she had spent an hour reading in a dead man's kitchen, letters that told a story the family had never known. She felt it now, sitting on the floor of a dead woman's room at 22 minutes past 8 on a Saturday night, with the barrel lock lying open under her hands. She gave herself a moment. Then she looked. The interior of the case was lined in dark green velvet, fitted and clean, without a trace of moisture or mold. The contents were arranged as carefully as everything else in this house. On the left side, secured by a set of velvet loops, were 7 envelopes of different ages, their flaps sealed, stacked in order from largest to smallest. On the right side, A velvet drawstring bag in deep blue sat beside a rolled tube sealed at both ends with dark wax. In the center, lying flat against the velvet floor of the case, was a single document sealed in a transparent archival sleeve, the kind used in museum preservation of paper. She did not open any of it yet. She photographed the interior from every angle, taking her time. She photographed the wax seals on the tube. She photographed the archival sleeve with the document visible through the plastic. Then she lifted the archival sleeve, very carefully, and held it up to the light of her phone. The document inside was written in 2 languages, German and English, alternating by section. Typed, not handwritten, from a manual typewriter based on the irregular pressure and slight variations in the letter strikes. At the top, in capital letters, Testament und Erklärung, and below that, the typed English translation, Will and Declaration. She could not read the German portions, but she could read the English. The English sections were dated November 3, 2004. They named a legal executor she did not recognize. They stated that the signer, who identified herself in the document as Eleanor Voss, born Lieselotte Elsa Hoffmann in Leipzig, Germany, in 1938, was of sound mind and was declaring her intentions regarding the objects in her possession acquired before her emigration to the United States in 1956. She read that sentence 3 times. Born Lieselotte Elsa Hoffmann, Leipzig, 1938. Acquired before her emigration in 1956. She set the sleeve back against the velvet and sat in the dark with her phone in her hand, and understood that she had found something. She did not know its size yet. But Eleanor Voss, who had come to Carver's Mill from somewhere and never talked about it, who had kept 30 years of storage unit receipts, who had sealed the backs of her frames, who had sat at her desk 15 years ago and wept while she wrote, had kept this case under her bed for the rest of her life. She reached into the case and lifted the blue velvet bag. It was heavy for its size, dense, shifting, the weight of multiple small solid objects. She loosened the drawstring slowly and tilted the bag and looked at what slid into her palm. Coins. Old ones, thick gold coins, not American, stamped with faces and lettering she did not recognize. 6 of them, then a 7th, then 2 more as she tilted the bag further. Real gold, from the color and the weight, that specific density that had no substitute. Old enough and well-preserved enough that she understood they were not simply currency, but objects with individual value beyond their metal content. She closed her palm around them, sat very still. From below her, the old house made its nighttime sounds. The furnace cycling. The tick of contracting wood as the temperature outside dropped. The particular quiet of a house that had held secrets for a long time and was not sure yet whether to release them. She set the coins back carefully in the velvet bag, closed the drawstring, placed the bag gently back in its place in the case. 9 gold coins. Old enough to carry dates she would have to look up, stamped with a language that was probably German or possibly Dutch, worn smooth in the places where hands had held them most. Not the kind of coins that ended up under someone's bed by accident. The kind that had been placed there deliberately by someone who understood precisely what they were. She pulled the archival sleeve back toward her and read the English sections of the will again, more slowly this time. The language was formal, drafted by someone who knew legal frameworks, but underneath the formality, she could hear Eleanor's voice. Not a person who had stumbled into possession of something, but a person who had built her entire life around protecting something that had never been solely hers to keep. The Hoffmann collection, whatever it was, had belonged to her father's gallery, and her father's gallery had served clients, and those clients and their descendants were part of this story whether Eleanor had named them or not. She thought about the inventory list. 8 pages of German she could not read. An April 1956 document cataloging objects brought from Europe. The kind of catalog a careful man would make before entrusting his daughter with the family's most carefully guarded possessions. The kind of document you typed and sealed and carried across an ocean inside a steel case and kept under your bed for the rest of your life because it was the only record that those objects had ever existed. Samuel Hoffmann had written it all down, and then he had died at their science stat, and his daughter had carried what he wrote across the Atlantic, and 68 years had passed. She set the sleeve back in the case. Then she sat on Eleanor Voss's bedroom floor and let herself understand what this moment was. She slept in the van, not because she was uncomfortable in the house. She had slept an emptier and worse ones. She slept in the van because she could not leave the case unattended upstairs and could not carry it out of the house without a clarity she did not yet have. Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money. It's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. She brought a blanket from the back and reclined the seat and lay there for a few hours, not quite sleeping, listening to the occasional car pass on the main road 2 blocks away. At 5 in the morning, she gave up and went back inside. She made coffee in Eleanor's kitchen with Eleanor's coffee maker and Eleanor's grounds, a can of Folgers, most of a year old but still functional, and she brought the cup upstairs and sat on the floor beside the open case in the gray early light coming through the window. The 7 envelopes. She picked up the largest, the bottom of the stack. Manila, thick, unsealed, just the flap tucked in, not glued. She opened it. Inside were 8 pages covered in German text with occasional numerical notations and what looked like inventory numbers. At the top of the first page, a heading she could partially parse without fluency in the language, Inventar. Inventory. Below that, a date, April 1956. She photographed each page carefully. She picked up the next envelope. White, sealed, addressed in English in the precise hand she now recognized as Eleanor's from the appointment calendar downstairs. Addressed to, the one who finds this. She opened it carefully, working a letter knife she had brought up from the kitchen, not tearing the paper. Inside was 2 pages, handwritten in English. She read, "If you have found this, you are inside my house, and I am gone. I am sorry that I cannot be there to explain these things myself. The explaining is something I should have done years ago, but I was afraid, and then I was old, and then it seemed too late to begin. Now I understand it is never too late. The late is only silence, and silence is what I have given too much of already. My name when I was born was Lieselotte Elsa Hoffmann. I was born in Leipzig in 1938 to Samuel Hoffmann and his wife Ruth, born Kessler. My father was an art dealer. He was the 3rd generation of Hoffmanns to deal in art, and he was the finest of them. My mother said this, and she was not a woman given to flattery. His gallery was on the Nicolaystrasse, and it had been there since my grandfather opened it in 1899. In 1938, everything changed. You know this if you know history, and if you found this case you are a person who looks at things carefully, and I believe you know history. My father moved what he could. He had been watching for 5 years, and he knew what was coming, and he moved what he could of the collection to safe places before they could take it. He died in 1944 at their Scienstadt. My mother died in 1945. I survived, with my father's sister, and in 1956 we came to America. I brought what I could carry of what my father had saved. I have spent my life keeping it safe. This was my purpose. I had no family left to give it to. I had no children. The nephew who may come looking after my property is Gerald, the son of a cousin I met twice, who has no connection to any of this and no claim to what my father saved. You found this case, which means you looked carefully. My father believed that objects reveal themselves to people who look carefully. I believe this also. It is how he taught me to look at art, and it is how I have looked at everything since. Inside this case you will find what I need you to find. There is more. The key to the larger question is in the 3rd envelope from the right. You are the person I have been waiting for, though I did not know your name or your face. If you are honest, you will know what to do. If you are not, I suppose I cannot stop you. But I believe in the person who looks carefully. My father did too. Her name was Eleanor. Before that, Lieselotte. Before that, her father's daughter, in a gallery on the Nikolastrasse in Leipzig. I am sorry it took so long to tell you. E.V. Marlene sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. She was 41 years old, and she had a master's degree in art history, and she knew what the Nikolastrasse was. She knew what Leipzig had been, before 1938 and after. She had written a thesis on displaced European art collections and post-war recovery efforts. A thesis that had never led to a job, but had given her the lens through which she saw the world. She knew what an art dealer moving what he could before 1938 had been moving. She knew what a 1956 April inventory list might mean. Her hands were not shaking. They were very still. She had written her thesis on this exact category of loss. 300 pages on the displacement of private European art collections between 1933 and 1945 and the decades-long effort to locate what remained. She had sat in the reading room of the National Archives in College Park going through State Department cables from the post-war years, cables documenting the frantic and often futile attempts to track objects that had simply vanished with the people who had owned them. She had read case files on families who had carried what they could and arrived in America with paintings rolled inside carpets and drawings folded inside the linings of coats and small sculptures wrapped in children's clothing and buried at the bottom of trunks that customs officers waved through because the families looked frightened enough and exhausted enough and broken enough that nobody wanted to take more from them. She had written all of that and then gone looking for a job and found that the world had limited appetite for people who understood it. Now she was sitting on the floor of a house in Licking County, Ohio, holding a handwritten letter from a woman born in Leipzig in 1938, and all 300 pages were alive again in the back of her mind. She picked up the third envelope from the right, as Eleanor had directed. Small, square, sealed with dark wax. She broke the seal. Inside was a key, brass, small, with a paper tag attached to a piece of white ribbon. On the tag, in Eleanor's handwriting, SS Unit 14. Secure Store. Unit 14. 30 years of annual receipts, paid in cash every January without fail, from the facility on Route 16 East. She held the key and thought about what it meant that Eleanor Voss had paid a storage unit bill every year for 3 decades in cash without fail. What she had been willing to pay, year after year, to keep something safe. She put the key in her pocket. Then she put the coins back in the velvet bag, put the velvet bag back in the case, put Eleanor's letter back in its envelope, put the inventory list back in its envelope, and closed the lid. She carried the case down the stairs and put it in the back of the van and locked the van. Then she went back inside and kept working. She had learned this from the job. When something complicated arrived, you kept working. The work grounded you, gave the thinking space to happen in the background while your hands stayed occupied. She worked through the morning, clearing the second bedroom, photographing and boxing. Nothing unusual in there. Furniture, boxes of old magazines, a closet of winter coats. The third bedroom was the same, ordinary and patient, a room waiting to become something else. But in the fourth bedroom, the one at the back of the house that looked out over the overgrown rear yard, she found the east wall. Eleanor's letter had not mentioned it. But Eleanor had written, "I believe in the person who looks carefully." The east wall of the back bedroom was papered in a pattern original to the house, a faded print of small blue diamonds on a cream background, applied sometime in the late 1950s based on the style. The paper was in reasonable condition for its age, except in one section, a patch about 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, starting roughly 3 feet from the floor, where the paper was slightly different. Not a different pattern, not a different era. The same paper, the same apparent age. But when Marlene stood at a certain angle and let the morning light from the east window fall across the surface, it showed her that the paper in that section was not flush against the wall. It was flush against something else. She pressed her palm gently against it. The surface gave a fraction of an inch. Not the wall. A panel behind the paper. She stood with her palm flat against the papered surface and closed her eyes. She thought about Samuel Hoffmann, who had spent 5 years watching what was coming and moving what he could before it arrived. She thought about what a man like that would choose to save, what he would risk everything to protect from the people who were coming for it. She thought about the kinds of objects that could not be converted to cash quickly without attracting attention, the kinds of objects that were too large to fold into a trunk lining, but too precious to leave behind, the kinds of objects that required a different solution entirely. She thought about a young woman of 18, boarding a ship in 1956 with everything her father had managed to hold back from those who came to take it, crossing the ocean to a country where no one knew her name. She thought about 68 years in a small Ohio town, alone, keeping watch. The crossed-off appointments. The twist ties sorted by color. The shoes resoled and polished and kept. The life reduced to the barest possible footprint so that all of the attention, all of the care, all of the daily labor of a woman's existence could go toward the one thing that mattered. She took her hand away from the east wall, went downstairs, sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, picked up her phone and found the number. Dr. Patricia Owens was the former chair of the art history department at Ohio State, Marlene's thesis advisor from 17 years ago, a woman who had sat across a seminar table from her for 3 years and taught her how to look at things before she had words for what she was looking at. They were not close. They exchanged emails at Christmas. Occasionally something in the world of art recovery made Marlene think of her, and she would send a note. She answered on the third ring. Marlene, I know it's Sunday morning. I'm at my desk. What's the matter? She looked at the 2019 calendar on Eleanor's wall, at the crossed-off appointments. I'm in a house in Licking County, Ohio. An estate clearance job. The woman who lived here was born in Leipzig in 1938. Her father was an art dealer on the Nikolastrasse. She came to America in 1956. She has been keeping something in this house for 60 years, and I believe I know what it is, but I need to be talking to someone who understands what that means before I do anything else. The pause on the other end was brief. Are you alone? Yes. Don't touch anything else. Don't move anything. And do not call whoever hired you for the clearance job until you and I have spoken. Dr. Owens's voice shifted into the register she used when she was thinking faster than she was speaking. I'm going to call a colleague of mine who handles provenance research. His name is David Ralph. He's at the Holocaust Art Restitution Project in Washington. I want him to be part of this conversation. Marlene looked at the grain of the kitchen table. Patricia, what are we talking about, potentially? A brief pause. If her father was dealing in Leipzig and moving assets in 1938, and if she brought what he saved, Dr. Owens stopped. Then, there is a specific category of displaced art from that period that remains unlocated. Works documented in pre-war gallery inventories that were moved before confiscation and then disappeared with the families who held them. International recovery efforts have been searching for these works for 50 years. And if something in that category is here, then it does not matter what the contract you signed says. It does not matter what the nephew believes he owns. What matters is a set of international laws and ethical frameworks, and, frankly, the correct thing to do. A beat. Can you stay there today? I'm staying until I understand what I've found. Good. I will call you back within the hour. She hung up. Outside, the morning was clearing. The Japanese maple in the front yard was catching some winter sun, its bare branches casting fine shadows across the front walk. From next door, a radio played something she could not quite make out through the glass. She thought about Samuel Hoffmann, who had died in their science dad in 1944, and a daughter who had survived him and carried what she could across the ocean and spent her entire life in a house on Sycamore Lane keeping it safe. She thought about her own children in Columbus, in an apartment with an eviction notice that had spent 11 days on the refrigerator before she folded it away. She thought about the east wall. She thought about what it meant to carry something for 68 years, and then, finally, let it go. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. Gerald Voss, Atlanta. She turned the phone face down. Whatever Gerald Voss wanted to say could wait. It could wait until she understood what was in this house. Until she understood what Eleanor had been keeping, and for whom, and what the right thing was to do with all of it. She had been paid $500 to empty a dead woman's house. Nobody had paid her to understand it. She was going to do that anyway. She sat in Eleanor Hoffmann's kitchen in the Sunday morning light, hands around a cooling cup of coffee, and waited for the phone to ring again. Outside on Sycamore Lane, the town of Carver's Mill went about its Sunday quietly, unaware that in this house, on this table, things were already in motion that would not be undone. The Japanese maple caught the light. The caller from Atlanta waited. And somewhere in the back bedroom upstairs, the east wall held whatever it had been holding since 1956, patient as stone. The phone rang at 10:43. Dr. Owens on the display, but when she answered, two voices came through. Owens from one location and a man Marlene did not recognize from another, the three-way quality of the call giving everyone's speech a faintly distant texture. Marlene, this is David Ralph. Patricia has told me the basic outline. I want to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them as precisely as you can. All right. The woman's name. Before she came to America. Lieselotte Elsa Hoffmann. Born Leipzig, 1938. Father named Samuel. A silence that stretched for 3 seconds. Samuel Hoffmann. Ralph's voice had changed. Not louder, not faster, but different in the way a voice changes when something expected becomes something confirmed. Of the gallery Hoffmann, Nicolaystrasse 14. She didn't give a street number in the letter. Nicolaystrasse 14. Third-generation gallery. Opened 1899 by his grandfather Moritz Hoffmann. Samuel took over in 1923 and ran it until 1938. We have the gallery in our records. A pause. Marlene, do you understand what I'm telling you? She was sitting in Eleanor's kitchen in the dark. She had not turned on a light. Tell me what you need me to understand. The Gallery Hoffmann was one of the preeminent dealers in German Expressionism in Leipzig between the wars. They represented artists at a time when those artists were not yet what they are worth today. Samuel Hoffmann's pre-war inventory included documented works by artists that we are now talking about in terms of individual auction prices in the range of $20 to $60 million each. Another pause, shorter this time. When the gallery closed in 1938 under pressure from the new regulations, the inventory records show 23 works unaccounted for. Not confiscated, not sold under duress, simply gone from the record. The assumption has always been that they were destroyed or taken informally, or that the records themselves were incomplete. Marlene looked at the wall above Eleanor's counter. The 2019 calendar. The crossed-off appointments. They weren't destroyed, she said. No. Ralph's voice was careful and quiet. They were moved, which is what the April 1956 inventory list in that case almost certainly documents. What are we talking about, in terms of value? The pause this time was the longest yet. She heard Owens on the other end breathing slowly. If even 4 or 5 of those 23 works are intact, Ralph said, we are talking about a collection worth in excess of $100 million. At minimum. He stopped. But I want to be very clear about something. Value is almost secondary here. What matters first is provenance and restitution. Many of these works would have had original owners beyond the Hoffmann Gallery itself, collectors who purchased from Samuel and whose own families have been searching for these objects for 80 years. This is not a simple matter of who found what. I understand that. Good. A beat. Is there anything else in the case beyond the inventory list, the will, the coins, and the envelopes you haven't opened yet? A rolled tube, sealed at both ends with wax. I haven't opened it. Don't open it alone. Can you wait until I can get someone there to document the opening properly? She thought about the east wall. She thought about the storage unit key in her pocket. She thought about Gerald Voss's missed call sitting on her screen. I can wait on the tube. But there's a storage unit. She paid for it for 30 years. I have the key. Owen spoke for the first time since the introduction. Go in the morning, Marlene. With your phone charged and recording. Document everything before you touch anything. And call us the moment you're inside. She agreed and hung up. She did not sleep that night. She sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and opened the remaining 4 envelopes from the case, working slowly, photographing each one before she opened it, and each page inside before she turned it. The third envelope held a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, written in German and bearing a date from 1978. She could not read it, but she could see from the handwriting that it was Eleanor's, and from the careful single fold that it had been read and refolded many times. The paper had the texture of something handled with deliberation over decades, not casually reached for, but taken out with intention, read slowly, and put back. The fourth envelope held correspondence. 3 letters, all addressed to Eleanor at a post office box number she did not recognize, all written in English, all bearing the letterhead of a law firm in Washington, D.C. The letters were dated 1998, 2004, and 2011 respectively. The 1998 letter discussed what it described as the ongoing question of legal ownership of displaced cultural property under the Washington Principles, a framework Marlene knew well from her thesis research. The international agreement that had established voluntary guidelines for the restitution of Nazi-looted art. The 2004 letter was longer, discussing specific steps Eleanor might take should she decide to pursue formal recognition of the collection's provenance. The 2011 letter was brief. A firm she had apparently consulted had reviewed her documentation and confirmed that the objects she described were consistent with the missing Hoffmann inventory. She had known all of it, had known exactly what she was holding, had consulted lawyers 3 times over 13 years, had chosen to stay quiet year after year, and keep paying the storage unit and keep the case under the bed and keep checking off her appointments on the calendar and sorting her twist ties by color and dying alone in the house on Sycamore Lane with the secret intact. The 5th envelope held photographs, black and white, 8 of them, printed on the heavy paper stock of the mid-20th century. Interior shots of a gallery space. High ceilings, wooden floors, paintings hung close together on white walls in the manner of the interwar period. Some of the works were small enough that she could not make out detail. Several were large enough that even in the imprecise reproductions, she could see something. Faces mostly. The German expressionists worked in faces. She had written extensively about the German expressionists, and there was a quality in even these reproductions that she recognized from her thesis years, from the afternoons she had spent in the reading room at the Columbus Museum of Art cross-referencing catalog entries with exhibition photographs. She spread the photographs across Eleanor's kitchen table and sat looking at them for a long time. Samuel Hoffmann's gallery, circa 1930 or so, based on the dress of the 2 figures visible in one shot, who were probably clients. Works on 3 visible walls. Maybe 40 paintings in total across the 8 photographs, though some were repeated from different angles, and it was impossible to count precisely. She thought, these photographs might be the most useful thing in the entire case. If any of the works were identifiable from these images, they could be matched against what was in the storage unit. Provenance through photography. The most careful man she had never met had thought to document his walls before everything was taken from him. The 6th envelope was empty. She checked it twice, holding it up to the light from the kitchen window. Nothing inside, but the envelope itself had been sealed and then carefully opened along the seam, as though whatever it had held had been removed at some point, and the envelope kept as a record of the removal. The 7th envelope, the smallest, held a key on a length of green ribbon. Flat, square at the top, older in design than the storage unit key. She did not know what it opened. She placed it carefully back in the velvet loop in the case. She went to the van at 2 in the morning and lay there watching the sky and thought about a woman who had lived inside a secret for 68 years and at some point decided to write it all down and seal it in an envelope addressed to the one who finds this and put it in a case under her bed to wait. She thought about the patience that required. Not the patience of waiting for something to happen. The patience of being the thing that held other things steady, year after year, while the world moved around you and tried to make you ordinary. The patience of knowing that the moment would come, that it had to come, and doing nothing to rush it or force it, only keeping everything exactly as it needed to be kept until the right person arrived and picked up the right key and put it in the right lock. She slept a few hours. Then she drove to Route 16 East. She was at Secure Store before it opened, sitting in the parking lot with the engine running and her phone charging from the dashboard port. The facility was built for rural practicality. A double row of orange roll-up doors facing each other across a cracked concrete lane, a small office building at the entrance with hours posted in the window, chain-link perimeter fence. One other car in the lot when she arrived, an older woman in a windbreaker who pulled a box from her unit and drove away without looking twice at Marlene. The office opened at 9. The manager was a man in his 50s named Todd, who looked like he had run this facility since it was built and had developed the particular patience of someone who understood that the people who rented storage units were often going through something difficult and did not need questions. She showed him the estate clearance paperwork and the key. Eleanor Voss, Unit 14. She's passed away. I'm the authorized clearance agent. He looked at the paperwork, checked something on his computer, looked at the key. We've got her account. Paid up through January. She always paid in January. He handed back the paperwork. Unit 14 is in the second row, far end. Climate-controlled section. She stopped. Climate-controlled? She paid the premium rate. Has for as long as I've had this place, and I bought it in 2003, so. He shrugged. Whatever she kept in there, She kept it at 65 degrees year-round. She walked down the concrete lane to the second row. Unit 14 was at the far end, one of the slightly larger units in the climate-controlled section, a heavier door than the standard roll-ups, with a conventional lock beside the mechanism. She was recording on her phone before she put the key in. The key turned cleanly. She lifted the door. The smell that came out was controlled and neutral, the smell of managed air without moisture or temperature variation, the smell of a place designed to prevent time from doing its work. The unit was approximately 10 feet deep and 10 feet wide, and in the gray morning light that came in behind her, she could see that it was full. Not randomly full. Full with intention. Along the left wall, 6 flat wooden crates, each one roughly 4 feet by 3 feet, stacked too high against the wall on a low platform that kept them off the concrete. The crates were made from a pale which she did not recognize at first glance, and they had been constructed with a precision that was immediately apparent. Dovetail joints at the corners, recessed fasteners, handles cut into the sides rather than applied externally. Professional museum-grade storage crating, the kind conservators used for irreplaceable objects. Along the right wall, for more crates of different sizes. Deeper, some of them, built for three-dimensional objects rather than flat works. 2 were sealed with wax around the lid joints, the same dark wax as the tube in Eleanor's case. In the center of the unit, on the same low platform, a flat-topped container in dark metal with a combination lock, about the size of a large briefcase, that she recognized from her research as the type of waterproof archival container used for paper documents and written records. She stood in the doorway for a long time without going in. 10 crates, plus the document container. She thought about 23 missing works from the Hoffmann gallery inventory. She thought about the April 1956 list of objects brought from Europe. She thought about a woman of 18, moving through customs at a port of entry with documentation describing the contents of her baggage as household goods and personal effects. She stepped inside and began to record. She walked the perimeter of the unit with her phone capturing every angle of every crate, the construction details, the way they had been stacked and arranged, the consistent quality of the workmanship across all of them. The crates on the left wall had small labels attached to their sides in Eleanor's handwriting, single letters and numbers. A1, A2, B1, B2, and so forth through the sequence. Organized, cataloged, waiting for someone to read the catalog against the contents. She crouched in front of the nearest crate and looked at the construction without touching it. The wood was darker at the joints than in the center of the panels, the natural aging of material assembled decades ago and maintained in controlled conditions ever since. She had seen similar crating in museum storage facilities during her graduate program, in the back rooms where things were kept that were too fragile or too significant for regular exhibition. This was not amateur work. The person who had built these crates had known exactly what they were building them for. She looked at the labels again. A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on. Simple, systematic, cross-referencing back to some master list she had not yet found. The 1956 inventory list, she suspected. The 8 German pages in the first envelope, each one indexed against whatever object sat in the labeled crate bearing its corresponding designation. Samuel Hoffmann had been an art dealer for 30 years. He had spent his professional life cataloging and tracking objects, knowing exactly what he had and where it was and what it was worth. His daughter had inherited that discipline along with the collection. The labeling system, the dovetailed crating, the combination hidden in the edge of a photograph, the annual trips to pay the storage fee in cash, all of it was the same mind at work, methodical, patient, unwilling to leave anything to chance. She stood and turned to the metal document container. She photographed it from every angle before she touched it. Then she tried the combination lock. It did not open. She looked at the container for a moment. Then she went back to the van and got her notebook and found the pages where she had written down the contents of each envelope. At the bottom of the page for the 5th envelope, she had noted a sequence of numbers visible on the edge of one of the gallery photographs when she had held it at a certain angle to the kitchen light. She had written them down without knowing why, only that they looked deliberate, not printed but handwritten in a very small hand along the bottom edge of the photograph, the kind of notation a careful person made when they needed to record something without making it obvious. She tried the sequence on the lock. The container opened. Inside were two things: a heavy-bound journal with a black cover and a sealed packet of papers in a transparent protective envelope, the same archival material as the sleeve holding the will in the case upstairs. She allowed herself to open the journal just enough to see the inside cover. Eleanor's name was not written there. Instead, in handwriting she did not recognize, the same angular precision she had seen in the German text on the photographs in the living room, was written a single line: for Lieselotte. Damn it, sie sich erinnert. She photographed it and closed the journal. She could not read it, but the phrase had the quality of something formal, something meant to endure. She would find someone to translate it before Ralph arrived, but she already had a sense of what it said. For Lieselotte, so she remembers. A father writing to his daughter. A man in Leipzig in 1956 who knew he would not survive to see what his daughter did next, leaving her something to carry. Then she called Owens. Are you inside? I'm inside. 10 crates. Museum quality construction. Climate controlled. She's been maintaining this unit for at least 20 years that I can document, probably longer. She paused. There's also an archival document container with what looks like a journal and a sealed packet of papers. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she checked her phone to confirm the call had not dropped. 10 crates. Owens's voice was careful and even. Marlene, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not open any of those crates alone. What I want you to do right now is ask the storage facility manager whether they have a security system with cameras. If they do, you need to be on camera not touching anything until I can get David out there with a conservator. How long will that take? He's in Washington. I can get him to Columbus tonight. Carver's Mill by tomorrow morning. A pause. Can you keep the unit locked and stay near the property until then? I can. Gerald Voss. Has he called you again? She looked at her phone. 3 missed calls from the Atlanta number, 2 the previous day, and 1 this morning before 8. 3 times. Don't call him back yet. We need to understand what you have before anyone with a competing claim has the opportunity to act on it. He has a contract with me. He gave me rights to the contents of the house. The storage unit is not the house. And international restitution law is not a contract between 2 private parties. Owens paused. Marlene, I'm telling you as a friend and as someone who has worked in this field for 30 years. If what you're describing is what I think it might be, the question of who owns what is going to be decided by a set of laws and agreements and historical obligations that Gerald Voss does not have the authority to override, regardless of what he thinks he inherited. He's going to show up, Marlene said. Probably. Are you all right with that? She thought about $500 and the eviction notice in the junk drawer. She thought about Eleanor's letter on the kitchen table upstairs in the house on Sycamore Lane. You are the person I have been waiting for. I'll manage, she said. She drove back to the house at noon and found a voicemail from Gerald Voss waiting on her phone. She played it in the van before she went inside. Ms. Okafor. Gerald Voss. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday, and I'm not getting a response, which concerns me. I also spoke with Brenda Hollis this morning, and she mentioned you've been at the property since Saturday and are still there now, which is a full weekend longer than I expected for a straightforward clearance job. I'm going to need a call back today. If there's something going on with the property, I need to know about it. I own that house and its contents, and I expect to be kept informed. She deleted the voicemail. She ate in Eleanor's kitchen and made more coffee and sat looking at the 8 photographs from the 5th envelope, still spread across the table where she had left them the night before. Gallery walls. 40-odd paintings hung close together in the interwar style, floor to ceiling, each one a record of something Samuel Hoffmann had believed was worth preserving and selling and bringing into the world. Jasmine called at 12:30. Marlene answered on the second ring. Mom, are you okay? You haven't texted. I'm okay. I'm still at the job. It's more complicated than I expected. What kind of complicated? She looked at the photographs. The kind that needs some time to work through. How are you and Marcus? Fine. Marcus ate an entire box of cereal for dinner last night because I forgot to defrost the chicken. That's technically fine. He'll survive. Mom. A pause with a specific texture to it. The texture of a 15-year-old trying to decide whether to say the next thing. Are you sure you're okay? You sound different. She was quiet for a moment. Different was right. She was different from the woman who had loaded the van before 6 on Saturday morning in the dark, stacking collapsible boxes and garbage bags while the neighbor's motion light flickered on and off across the alley. That woman had been exhausted and behind on rent, and trying not to think about the eviction notice she had just moved to the junk drawer. That woman had answered a call from an Atlanta number because $500 was $500 and the job board had nothing new. I found something in this house that matters. I'm still working out what to do about it. What kind of something? The kind someone spent their whole life taking care of. She paused. I'll be home in a day or two. Keep feeding your brother. Mom, are we going to be okay? With the rent thing. She had not told Jasmine about the eviction notice. Jasmine had seen it on the refrigerator before she moved it to the drawer, which meant Jasmine had known about it and had not brought it up for 11 days, which was its own kind of parenting, the child deciding not to make the mother's problem worse. Yes, Marlene said. We're going to be okay. She did not yet know what that meant in specific terms, but she believed it, which was new. She thought about Eleanor Hoffmann crossing the Atlantic with her father's inventory and her father's collection and her father's memory, and spending 68 years keeping all three intact for a person she had never met. She opened Eleanor's letter again and read it from the beginning. You are the person I have been waiting for, though I did not know your name or your face. She folded it and put it back in its envelope. Then she went upstairs to the back bedroom and stood in front of the east wall. She had not brought a pry bar for this kind of work. She had a flathead screwdriver, a utility knife, and the patience she had spent years developing for things that required care. She started at the edge of the section she had identified the day before, where the wallpaper was slightly different from the surrounding surface, where the light through the east window had shown her the irregularity. She worked the blade of the utility knife along the seam where the paper met the baseboard, cutting through slowly without tearing, following the line around all four sides of what she could now see more clearly was a distinct panel. The panel was approximately 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall. The wallpaper had been applied over it without a seam break, which meant whoever had installed the panel had done so at the same time as the wallpapering, or had been careful enough to paper over it seamlessly afterward. Either way, the intention was concealment. Not the concealment of someone hiding something hastily, but the concealment of someone who planned to maintain the hiding for a very long time. She worked around all four edges with the knife and then used the flathead screwdriver to find the gap between the panel and the surrounding wall. The gap was there, narrow but consistent, and when she applied gentle pressure the panel moved. Not inward, outward. It was hinged on the left side, she realized, and there was some kind of catch on the right. She worked the screwdriver carefully along the right edge until she felt the mechanism give. The panel swung toward her. She had been expecting a standard between stud space, 12 or 14 inches deep. What the panel opened onto was deeper than that. The wall had been modified, the studs moved or the space extended into the cavity behind the lathe, creating a recess roughly 2 feet deep, 3 feet wide, and 2.5 feet tall, with an interior lined in the same pale wood as the storage unit crates. The space was clean, dry, the same neutral controlled smell as the storage unit. Inside, arranged with the same careful logic as everything else Eleanor Voss had ever organized, were 4 objects. 3 of them were flat packages, each no larger than a standard piece of luggage, wrapped in archival tissue, and then in oilcloth, and then bound with cotton tape that had aged from white to cream. They were the size of medium-small paintings, the kind that could be carried under an arm. The 4th object was different. Smaller than the others, no larger than a hardcover book, in a separate container, a wooden box, handmade, fitted with a clasp. She could see even before she opened it that the box had been constructed with the same dovetail precision as the storage unit crates. The same hands had built it. The same person who had built everything else she had found in the past 2 days had built this box for this specific object, placed it here, papered over the door, and trusted that the right person would eventually find it. She lifted the box first, set it on the floor beside her, and opened the clasp. Inside, nestled in fitted green velvet, was a painting. Small, on a wooden panel rather than canvas. The paint surface darkened by age and in places obscured by what conservators called grime, the accumulated surface coating of decades, but not damaged. Not cracked. Not flaking. The varnish had yellowed, but the underlying colors were visible through it. A deep blue ground. Figures rendered in a manner that she could feel in her chest before she could place it, in any historical framework. The particular quality of mark-making that separated the work of a genuinely extraordinary hand from everything else. The way the marks on the surface carried weight and intention that you could not learn and could not imitate, that arrived from some place in the making of the work that transcended the sum of the technical decisions. She held the box under the light from the east window. The signature was in the lower right corner, small, almost modest, written in paint the color of burnt umber. She could not make it out at this scale. The letters were there, but required magnification. She held her phone over the signature and took a photograph, then enlarged the image on her screen. She read the name. She sat down on the floor. Her back went against the wall beside the open panel, and she sat with the box in her lap and the painting inside it, under the gray Ohio light coming through the east window, and looked at what she was holding and understood that the number David Ralph had given her the night before, $100 million at minimum, was almost certainly wrong. Not too high, too low. She called Ralph directly. He answered before the second ring. "I'm in the back bedroom," she said. "I found the east wall." "What's in it?" "4 objects. 3 wrapped packages, medium-sized, I haven't opened them, and a 4th one in a fitted wooden box. Unlocked. The painting inside is on a panel, not canvas. Small, maybe 8 by 10 inches. Condition? Old varnish, some surface grime, no visible cracking or flaking. The paint surface looks intact. Signature." She looked at the photograph on her phone. "Read him the name." The silence this time was very long. "Marlene." His voice had gone entirely still. "I need you to put the painting back in the box and the box back in the wall and close the panel." "Why?" "Because if you're reading that signature correctly, what you're holding is one of the most significant missing works of the early 20th century, and the moment that becomes known, the number of parties who will want to lay claim to it is going to expand very rapidly. You need to be in a position where you have been scrupulously careful about chain of custody from the first moment of discovery. A breath. I'm already booked on the first flight to Columbus tomorrow morning. I'm bringing a conservator from the National Gallery who owes me a favor and doesn't ask unnecessary questions until he's had a chance to look at something. Can you hold the property until then?" "I can hold it. Is there anyone else who knows what you found?" She thought about Gerald Voss's voicemail. The word own, used with that particular confidence. "Not yet. Keep it that way if you can." Another pause. "Marlene, I've been doing this work for 22 years. I've been involved in 3 restitution cases that made international news and 1 that didn't because the parties chose to settle privately. I want you to understand something." He paused again. "Most of the cases I've worked, the discovery was made by a museum curator or an auction house specialist or a private collector with resources. Someone who had the infrastructure to manage what happened next. You're alone in a house in Ohio with a phone and an estate clearance contract." He stopped. "That's going to create complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that arrive when someone with a legal claim, or a claimed legal claim, learns that something valuable has been found and decides they don't want to wait for the proper process." She looked at the closed panel. "Gerald Voss," she said, "and possibly others once word spreads. These things spread faster than anyone expects." She asked the question she had been building toward since the night before. "The will inside the case." "Eleanor's will." She was explicit that Gerald has no claim. "Does that hold?" "Her formal will from 2004 may have legal standing, but it will be contested. Gerald is the named heir to the estate property, and he'll argue that everything found in and attached to the estate is his by inheritance. International restitution law says otherwise for any works with clear pre-war provenance that were displaced as a result of Nazi persecution. But the legal process is not fast, and in the meantime, you are on that property with a contract that gives you certain rights, and he is an heir with certain other rights, and the space between those 2 positions is where things get complicated." "Complicated how?" "Expensive, legally contested, potentially very unpleasant if he decides to be aggressive about it." He paused. "Is the estate attorney someone you can reach?" She found the number from Brenda's folder. "I have a name. Call them first thing in the morning, before Gerald can. You want to be on record as having notified the estate's legal representative before anyone else." After she hung up, she sat for a few more minutes in the back bedroom with the wooden box in her lap, the panel closed beside her, the east window going amber as the afternoon light started to angle westward. She thought about what it meant that Ralph had gone still when she read the signature. David Ralph had worked 2 decades in restitution research. He had seen discoveries that made news. He had been in rooms when things previously believed to be lost were confirmed as found. She had heard all of that in his voice, the controlled steadiness of a man, keeping his reaction professional. And she had also heard what was underneath it, the particular quality of silence that arrived when something genuinely unexpected happened to someone who thought they had accounted for most of the possible surprises in their field. She had read him a name, and he had gone very quiet. She thought about what that meant. She thought about Eleanor Hoffmann arriving in Ohio in the late 1950s looking for a town small enough that nobody would look at her twice. Finding Carver's Mill. Buying the house on Sycamore Lane. Building the panel into the east wall of the back bedroom with her own hands, or with the help of someone she trusted enough to bring into the secret. Driving to Secure Store every January to pay the annual fee in cash, in a small envelope, without a word to Todd or Todd's predecessor about what was inside Unit 14. 68 years of the same discipline, the same careful maintenance, the same crossed-off appointments, the same polished shoes, the same sorted twist ties. Eleanor Hoffmann had never stopped being Samuel Hoffmann's daughter, never stopped running the inventory, never stopped treating the works in her care as what they were, objects that did not belong to her alone, that had been made by human hands and belonged to the human record, that had been saved from people who intended to erase the human record wherever it contradicted their idea of what humanity should look like. She put the painting back in its box, placed the box back in the lined recess of the east wall, closed the panel. She went downstairs. Gerald Voss was standing in Eleanor's living room. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He was not what she had pictured from the phone call. Shorter than she had imagined, in his 50s, wearing a sport coat over a collared shirt in the way that suggested he had driven from somewhere and put the coat on at the last minute to look more authoritative than he felt. He had the expression of a man who had spent the drive rehearsing what he was going to say and was now slightly thrown off by the fact that she was standing there looking at him calmly. He was looking at the boxes she had staged near the front door. At the cleared bookshelves, their outlines still visible as faint rectangles where the wallpaper had not faded behind them. At the space where Eleanor's life had been compressed and sorted and reduced to stacks waiting for removal. His gaze moved around the room with the quick inventory of someone who had come expecting to find something and was not yet sure whether he had. The front door was unlocked, he said. It was. She came down the last 2 steps and stood at the bottom of the stairs with her hands in her jacket pockets. How can I help you, Mr. Voss? You haven't been returning my calls. I've been working. He looked around the living room, at the cleared shelves, the boxes staged near the wall. Then he looked back at her with something in his expression that was not quite suspicion, but was clearly in that direction. I flew up from Atlanta last night. He paused. Brenda tells me you've been here since Saturday. That's 3 days for what she described as a straightforward clearance job. His gaze moved toward the dining room, toward the wall where Eleanor's pressed wildflower frames had hung before Marlene moved them to the assessing pile. I want to know what's going on. Marlene looked at him steadily. The house is more complex than your description suggested. For bedrooms, decades of accumulated material, most of it requiring assessment before disposal. I'm working through it carefully. Have you found anything valuable? The question landed with a directness that told her he already suspected the answer was yes. That someone had said something to him, or that 3 days of unanswered calls had been enough to make him fly from Atlanta rather than wait for a call back. I found a number of things that require further assessment before I can characterize them, she said. That's standard for an estate of this complexity. I'm in the process of consulting with specialists. Specialists? He repeated the word with the tone of someone who had not expected to hear it. What kind of specialists? Art history and provenance research. She paused. Your aunt had a more significant background than her life here suggested. I've been working to understand the full picture before making any decisions about the estate contents. Gerald Voss was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his expression. I own this property and its contents. Whatever you found it as my contracted agent. I think we need to get very clear about what belongs to me before any specialists start making assessments. She looked at him. She thought about Eleanor's letter. The nephew who may come looking after my property. He has no connection to any of this and no claim to what my father saved. She thought about Samuel Hoffmann at his desk in Leipzig, writing down everything he had moved before the people who were coming for it arrived. She thought about 68 years of trust placed in the hands of a stranger who happened to look carefully. "I understand your position," she said. "I'd suggest we both have conversations with the estate attorney in the morning. I'll be reaching out to them first thing." Gerald Voss looked at her for a long moment. "First thing," he said. "First thing." He looked around the living room one more time, at the walls that had held Eleanor's photographs and now held nothing, at the boxes staged near the front door, at the house that had kept its secret from him for as long as Eleanor Voss had been alive. His jaw worked slightly, like a man deciding whether the next thing he was going to say was the right move, then deciding against it. He walked back through the front door. She heard his car start in the driveway and listened until the sound faded down Sycamore Lane. She stood alone in the cleared living room in the early evening quiet. Tomorrow David Ralph and a conservator from the National Gallery would arrive in Carver's Mill, Ohio, and they would open the storage unit crates and stand before what Samuel Hoffmann had saved in the spring of 1938 and Eleanor Hoffmann had carried across the ocean in the spring of 1956 and kept in climate-controlled dark for 68 years. They would open the archival packages and the document container and the rolled tube with its wax seals, and the numbers Ralph had spoken carefully on the telephone would begin to take on their true shape. And Gerald Voss, who had offered her $500 to empty the house of a woman he had met twice, would have to decide what he intended to do about the fact that the woman's life had turned out to be something entirely different from what he had assumed. Tonight she locked the front door and went upstairs and sat on the floor of the back bedroom with her back against the east wall, the closed panel behind her, the Ohio sky going dark through the window. She had not eaten much since the morning. She was tired in a way that went past the body into something else, the particular exhaustion of holding something significant carefully for a long time without being able to put it down. She thought about Ralph's phrase, scrupulously careful about chain of custody from the first moment of discovery. That was what she had been, from the moment she photographed the case before she touched it to the moment she closed the east wall panel without opening the wrapped packages. Chain of custody. The legal phrase for the thing she had been doing by instinct, by the training that had gone nowhere professionally but had quietly formed her, by the particular attention to sequence and documentation that her graduate work had built into her way of moving through the world. She had done it right. She was not a curator or an auction house specialist or a private collector with infrastructure, but she had done it right anyway, because she had been trained to understand that the integrity of an object's history was inseparable from the object itself. A painting without provenance was a beautiful thing and nothing more. A painting with provenance was a piece of evidence, a piece of history, a living connection to the people who had made it and owned it and hidden it and given their lives to protect it. Eleanor had understood this. Samuel Hoffmann had built his career on it. And Gerald Voss, who had flown up from Atlanta and stood in the living room talking about what he owned, did not understand it at all. She had a van, a utility knife, a lock-picking set, and a master's degree in a subject the world had found limited use for. She had $42 in her checking account as of Thursday night and an eviction notice in the junk drawer. She also had Eleanor's letter. She also had the name of the painting's artist, written in paint the color of burnt umber in the lower right corner of an 8 by 10-inch panel that had been waiting in a lined wooden recess behind a bedroom wall in Carver's Mill, Ohio, for longer than Marlene Okafor had been alive. She thought about her thesis. 300 pages she had handed to a committee of 4 people and then spent 2 years trying to turn into something useful in the world. Provenance research for displaced collections. Post-war recovery frameworks. The Washington Principles. The gap between what had been documented as missing and what had actually been found. The number of works still unaccounted for after 80 years of coordinated international effort. She had written those 300 pages in the university library at Ohio State, surrounded by books she had borrowed and returned and borrowed again, eating vending machine food, and sleeping 4 hours a night for the 3 months before her deadline. She had believed, during those 3 months, that the work mattered. That understanding this history, tracing the shape of what had been taken and what had survived and where it all was now, was worth doing precisely because it was difficult and precise and required someone to look carefully for a long time without any guarantee of finding anything. The committee had agreed the thesis was excellent. Nobody had offered her a job doing it. She had spent 11 years doing estate clearances instead, which turned out to require many of the same skills and none of the professional credentialing. and she had told herself for a long time that this was a failure of some kind. A deviation. The degree that didn't lead anywhere. She understood now that it had been leading here. She thought about what it meant that Eleanor had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment, and had trusted that the right person would arrive in time to receive what she had kept. Marlene had almost not answered the phone on Thursday night. She had almost let the call go to voicemail because it was after 9 and she was tired and the job board had nothing new. She had answered it anyway, because the alternative was sitting there watching the cursor blink, and because $500 was $500, and because in her experience the things that mattered almost always arrived looking like things that probably didn't. Eleanor had believed that objects revealed themselves to people who looked carefully. Samuel Hoffmann had believed the same thing. Marlene had spent years believing it too, quietly, in the way you held on to beliefs that no one in your life understood the use of. Her sister did not understand why a person with a graduate degree would spend her professional life in dead people's houses. Her ex-husband had not understood it either. Even Jasmine, who was 15 and perceptive and generous, did not quite understand it yet. She understood it. Some things needed to be found by someone who would recognize what they were. Some objects waited for the right pair of hands. The gallery photographs in the 5th envelope had included a handwritten number sequence along the bottom edge that could have been anything that most people would have noted and set aside and never thought about again. The institutional marking on the case could have been dismissed. The sealed backs on the pressed flower frames could have been attributed to an eccentric old woman's habits and left at that. She had not dismissed any of it. She sat with her back against the east wall and listened to the old house settle around her, the furnace coming on in the basement, the windows ticking as the temperature dropped outside, the Japanese maple moving in whatever wind was passing through Sycamore Lane. She thought about Eleanor picking this town for its obscurity, for its one stoplight and its half-empty main street, and its 30-year neighbor who would not ask what a person cried about at her desk. She had lived her entire American life in this house, this specific house, because it had walls deep enough to hold what she was keeping. The east wall, the storage unit, the barrel-locked case under the bed. 3 layers of safekeeping, each one calibrated to the significance of what it held. She thought about how precisely Eleanor had arranged the conditions for this moment. The contract Marlene had signed gave her rights to the house contents. The will in the case declared Gerald's claim void. The letter addressed to the one who finds this served as both explanation and instruction. The 7 envelopes, the key on a green ribbon, the number sequence hidden in the edge of a photograph. All of it was a map drawn by a woman who had spent years thinking through exactly how to transfer what she had kept to exactly the right hands. Eleanor had not left this to chance. She had designed it. The same mind that had built the storage unit crates and papered over the east wall panel and paid the annual fee in cash without fail had designed the conditions of the handoff with the same precision. She had wanted someone to find the case. She had wanted that person to open it, to read the letter, to call the right people, to understand what was at stake and do the right thing by it. She had bet on a stranger. She had bet correctly, and she had never told anyone. Not the Washington lawyers she had consulted. Not Ray Tillman, who had been her neighbor for 30 years. Not the stranger in the blue out-of-state car who had come and gone in 45 minutes carrying nothing, leaving Eleanor watching from her window with the expression of someone who had just passed a test. She had kept the secret in full until the end. And then she had placed it in an envelope addressed to the one who finds this and waited. Marlene looked at the closed panel in the east wall. The morning would come. Ralph would come. The conservator would come. The estate attorney would come, and Gerald Voss would come back. And whatever process was necessary to do the right thing by Samuel Hoffmann's collection and by Samuel Hoffmann's memory would begin, slowly and carefully, the way things that mattered always moved. But tonight, in the back bedroom of the house on Sycamore Lane, the secret was still mostly hers. She owed that to Eleanor. She would carry it carefully until morning. Ralph called at 6:48 to say they had landed in Columbus and were on the road. He asked if anything had changed overnight. She told him no. He said they would be there by 9. She made coffee and sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and called the estate attorney at 7, leaving a voicemail that stated her name, her contract, and the basic facts of what she had found. She kept her voice level and her sentences short. She asked the attorney to call her before speaking to anyone else connected to the estate, and she said this part twice. Then she sat with her coffee and watched the Japanese maple in the front yard go from gray to green as the sun cleared the elms on the eastern end of Sycamore Lane, and she tried to think clearly about the day ahead. Gerald Voss had driven back to Columbus or was in a motel somewhere nearby. He would return. She understood that with the same certainty, she understood that the sun was going to clear those elms. He had stood in the living room the night before with the quick inventory gaze of a man who had come to find something, and he had not found it, and the not finding had made him quieter and more deliberate on his way out the door. That kind of quiet in a man who had been aggressive on the phone was not a retreat. It was calculation. She thought about the chain of custody. She had been scrupulous. Everything photographed before it was moved. Everything moved with care. The storage unit locked, the east wall panel closed, the case in the back of her van. Nothing opened that Ralph had asked her not to open. She had been a good steward of this discovery, and she wanted that stewardship on the record before anyone arrived to contest it. The estate attorney called back at 8:15. Her name was Susan Haverfield, and she had the voice of someone who had handled enough complicated estates to feel no particular alarm at complication. She listened without interrupting while Marlene explained the case, the will inside it, the storage unit, the east wall, the call with David Ralph from the Holocaust Art Restitution Project. A long pause followed. The 2004 will, Haverfield said. You have the original document? In an archival sleeve. In a locked case that I'm keeping in my vehicle. And the will explicitly addresses the nephew's claim to the art. It names him specifically and states he has no connection to the collection and no claim to it. Another pause, this one with the quality of someone doing rapid calculations. I should tell you that Gerald Voss contacted me this morning as well. About 40 minutes ago. He was asking about the scope of his inheritance and whether the estate attorney's obligations extended to informing him of any developments with the property. What did you tell him? That I would be in touch. Haverfield paused. Ms. Okafor, I need you to understand my position here. I represent the estate of Eleanor Voss, not any individual party. My obligation is to the estate and to the legal process. If there is a valid 2004 will that was unknown to me at the time Gerald Voss was identified as heir, that changes the estate proceedings substantially. When can you be in Carver's Mill? This afternoon. 2 o'clock. A beat. Don't open anything further until I've seen the original will document. Understood. She hung up and refilled her coffee and heard Ralph's rental car pull into the driveway at 9:04. David Ralph was younger than she had pictured from the voice on the phone. Early 40s, in wire-rimmed glasses and a dark jacket, carrying a bag that held his working materials the way a doctor carried a medical kit. Everything accounted for, everything in its place. He shook her hand at the front door with a directness that skipped pleasantries. Beside him was a man he introduced as Thomas Greaves, conservator, National Gallery, who had the look of someone who spent most of his professional life in controlled environments assessing things quietly. He carried a hard-sided case and a portable examination light on a folded stand, and he looked at the house the way Marlene had looked at it on Saturday morning, cataloging it before he touched anything. The storage unit first, Ralph said. Everything in sequence. She drove. Ralph rode with her. Greaves followed in the rental car with his equipment. The Secure Store parking lot was empty this early on a weekday morning. Todd opened the office without questions, checked Marlene's paperwork again, and said nothing when Ralph produced credentials from the Holocaust Art Restitution Project and asked about the facility's security camera system. The cameras covered the entrance and the main lane. Unit 14 was visible from camera 2. Todd confirmed they had recorded footage going back 90 days. We'll need a copy of that footage, Ralph said. At minimum from Saturday, when Ms. Okafor first accessed the unit. Todd looked at the credentials again and nodded. They walked down the concrete lane to Unit 14. Marlene unlocked the door. She stepped back. Ralph and Greaves stood in the doorway together for a moment, not speaking, taking in the interior the way she had taken it in the day before. Greaves set up the portable examination light first. It ran off a battery pack and produced a broad, even illumination that transformed the unit from a dim storage space into something that felt almost clinical, the crates casting precise shadows on the concrete floor. Ralph photographed everything from the doorway before either of them stepped inside. Wide shots, then progressively closer. The labeled crates on the left wall, the deeper crates on the right, the archival document container in the center. He photographed Marlene's original documentation on his laptop, comparing the photos she had taken against what he was seeing now, confirming that nothing had been disturbed. Then they went in. Greaves approached the A1 crate with the deliberation of someone who had opened significant things before and knew the weight of the moment preceding the opening. He examined the crate's exterior first, the joints and fasteners, and the label in Eleanor's hand, running a gloved finger along the seam of the lid without pressing. Then he looked at Ralph. Ralph nodded. Greaves released the lid fasteners one by one, 4 of them, each one unscrewing smoothly, well-maintained, regularly opened and resecured over the years. The lid lifted away to reveal an interior packed with archival materials, tissue first, then a layer of acid-free foam, then the object itself. A canvas roll, perhaps 3 feet long, secured at both ends with cotton tape in the same aged cream as the packages in the east wall. Greaves lifted it out with both hands, and the weight of it, the specific density of a rolled canvas of meaningful size, was visible in the way he adjusted his grip. He set it on the flat lid of the adjacent crate and began unrolling. The tissue came away first. Then the outer protective layer, a material she identified as mylar or something like it, the kind of barrier used when you needed to protect a surface from its own wrappings over a long period. Then the canvas itself, emerging slowly from the roll as Greaves worked with both hands. What appeared was a portrait, large, nearly 3 feet tall by 2 feet wide when fully unrolled, painted in the mode of the German Expressionist school she had studied and written about and spent years looking at in reproductions. Figures rendered in dense, urgent color, the marks on the surface carrying the quality she had described to herself the night before when she held the panel from the east wall, something that arrived from a place in the making of the work that transcended the sum of the technical decisions. A face looking out from the canvas with an attention that pulled at something in the center of the chest. Greaves held the portable examination light over the surface and crouched slightly, bringing his eye close to the paint layer without touching it. He did not speak for nearly a minute. Then, the paint layer is intact. Some surface grime, expected for age and handling history. The canvas has aged naturally, but shows no active deterioration. He straightened. This needs a proper examination under laboratory conditions, but based on what I can see here, this canvas has been kept as well as any work in storage that I have personally encountered in 20 years of conservation work. Ralph was looking at the portrait with his hands in his pockets and his face doing the controlled, neutral thing that Marlene was beginning to recognize as his way of managing a response he did not want to display before he understood its full scope. The lower right, Marlene said. Ralph moved his attention to the lower right corner of the canvas. His expression stayed controlled, but his stillness changed quality. That's consistent with the signature on works from the mid-period. She had not looked up the name from the east wall panel. She had held it in her memory from the moment she read it on her phone screen and had not yet let it out loud. The name was one she knew from her thesis, from the reading rooms, from the cross-referenced catalog entries. A name known to every major museum in the world. A name that attached to individual works sold at auction for numbers that required a person to read the figure twice to believe it. Greaves had moved to the next crate. He opened it with the same methodical care and found another rolled canvas, smaller this time, and when it came out and lay under the examination light, the quality was the same. They worked through the morning. A1 and A2 held the 2 large canvases. B1 and B2 held 2 more, different in style and scale from the first pair, the mark-making characteristics indicating different hands, both clearly the work of artists of the first rank from the interwar school. C1 held 3 drawings in a flat portfolio of archival board, works on paper that Ralph handled with a care that suggested he recognized what he was looking at. The 4 crates on the right wall held 2 small sculptures wrapped in archival padding, one a bronze, one carved from a pale stone she could not identify without expertise. 2 more crates held paintings in a different medium and format from the canvases, works on wood panel that predated the Expressionist school, older and more formally composed, the kind of work that anchored a gallery's historical depth while the newer acquisitions drew attention. 15 works in total, across 10 crates. The April 1956 inventory list, which Ralph had photographed and sent to a colleague in Berlin for translation overnight, accounted for 15 items. not the 23 missing from the gallery records. 15. 8 of the original 23 had been lost in the years between the gallery's closure and Eleanor's departure, to circumstances the inventory did not detail. 15 works had survived. 15 had made it to Carver's Mill. 15 had sat in this unit for somewhere between 20 and 30 years, maintained at 65 degrees, paying their rent annually in January. Ralph took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was the first unguarded gesture she had seen from him. We need to bring in the full authentication team. This is beyond a preliminary assessment. Greaves was already resealing the crates in the order they had opened them. The conservation priority is getting these into a proper facility as quickly as possible. Climate-controlled, UV-protected, monitored. He looked at the sealed unit. She did everything right. The storage conditions are almost exactly what a conservation specialist would have recommended. Whoever built those crates knew what they were doing. She did, Marlene said. Her father was a dealer for 30 years. She grew up knowing how to take care of things. Greaves looked at her for a moment. Then she did him justice. They drove back to the house on Sycamore Lane and opened the east wall panel. The wooden box with the panel painting came out of its velvet bed the same way it had the day before, small and quiet, and carrying its particular weight. Greaves held it under the examination light for a long time, moving the light at different angles to the surface, examining the paint layer with a magnifier he produced from his case. He did not say the name. He did not confirm the signature out loud. But the quality of his attention, the way he stopped moving and held the light perfectly steady above one section of the lower right corner, told Marlene everything she needed to know about what she had found. "I'll need the full laboratory," he said eventually, setting the magnifier down. "But I can tell you this. The panel construction, the ground preparation, the paint application technique, the aging characteristics of the varnish layer. All of it is consistent with the period and the hand. This is not a reproduction. This is not a later copy." He paused. "This is the original work." Ralph was looking at her. "You read the signature by phone camera in bad light, and your eyes were tired." "Yes." "And you called me immediately." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "In 22 years, I have been called about a lot of things. Museum curators who thought they had found something. Auction house specialists. Private collectors with half an idea. Estate attorneys." He paused. "You called me with the right information in the right order, and you had documented everything before you touched anything, and you kept your hands off the crates until I got here." He paused again. "I want you to know that I'm aware that was not nothing." She did not say anything. "The 2004 will," Ralph said. "Does it address compensation for the finder?" "I haven't read the full German text, but the English sections mention obligations regarding the objects and their disposition. We'll need a full translation today." He was already on his phone. The estate attorney, Susan Haverfield, arrived at 2 o'clock as she had said she would. She was in her early 60s, with a practical precision about her that suggested she had spent her career solving problems other people had created. She came alone, which Marlene took as a good sign. She shook hands at the door, looked at the house with a professional eye, and sat down at Eleanor's kitchen table with her briefcase open in front of her. Ralph walked her through the documentation. The case, the will, the inventory list, the storage unit, the east wall. The gallery photographs spread across the table. The preliminary assessment by Greaves, who had gone back to the storage unit with his full equipment to continue the documentation. Haverfield read Eleanor's English-language letter slowly, twice. Then she read the visible portions of the 2004 will. She set it down and looked at the table for a moment before she looked up. "The 2004 will is a complication I was not aware of," she said, "because it was never filed with the court. It's a private document that Eleanor kept in her own possession and never submitted to probate." She paused. "That means it will need to go through a validation process before it can legally supersede the prior will under which Gerald Voss was identified as heir." "How long does that take?" "Weeks at minimum. Months more likely, if it's contested." She looked at Ralph. "And the international restitution dimension means there are additional parties and frameworks that will need to be involved before any disposition of the works can occur. Gerald Voss cannot simply take these works," Ralph said. "Under the Washington Principles, which the United States is a signatory to, Any works with documented pre-war provenance displaced as a result of Nazi persecution are subject to restitution proceedings regardless of how they came to be in a private estate. I understand that, Haverfield said. I'm telling you what Gerald Voss's attorney is going to argue, not what will ultimately prevail. She paused. Speaking of which, he called me again this morning. He mentioned he has retained a Columbus attorney who specializes in estate litigation. The front door opened. Gerald Voss came in with a man in a suit and good shoes who had the compact, deliberate bearing of someone who billed by the hour and did not waste his own time. The attorney introduced himself as James Pryor, gave Haverfield a nod that acknowledged she was a peer rather than an obstacle, and looked at Ralph's credentials on the table with the specific attention of someone reading a document in order to form a legal opinion about it. Mr. Ralph, Pryor said, I understand you're here in a capacity related to the contents of this property. I'm here in a capacity related to an international art restitution case, Ralph said. The contents of this property include works of art with documented pre-war provenance that are subject to proceedings under the Washington Principles on Nazi-confiscated art. Pryor absorbed this without visible reaction. My client is the legal heir to this estate. Any works or objects found on this property or in properties associated with this estate are part of that inheritance until and unless a court determines otherwise. Your client's aunt was born Lieselotte Elsa Hoffmann in Leipzig in 1938, Marlene said. She was the daughter of Samuel Hoffmann, who ran a gallery that documented 23 works as unaccounted for when it closed under Nazi pressure. 15 of those works have been in this property or associated storage since approximately the 1990s. She paused. Your client's aunt left a formal will, drafted in 2004, explicitly stating that he has no claim to the collection. An international law would say the same thing regardless of the will. Gerald Voss looked at her. Something was working in his face that had not been there the night before. Not the calculating quiet of a man deciding his next move. Something more like the expression of a person who had just heard a door close on a room he had assumed was always going to be available to him. She never said anything, he said. In my entire life, I met her twice. She never said anything about any of this. No, Marlene said. She didn't. He stood for a moment in the living room of his aunt's house, a house he had described on the phone as probably just newspapers and old clothes, and looked at the cleared shelves and the boxes staged near the door and the space where 68 years of carefully organized secrecy had lived. Pryor touched his client's elbow. A quiet, professional touch. Enough to bring Gerald back into the conversation. We'll need to see the 2004 will and the inventory documentation. All of it. Haverfield agreed to that. The attorneys would correspond. The documents would be shared through proper channels. The process would proceed the way these things proceeded, carefully, in writing, without anyone doing anything that could not be undone. Gerald Voss turned and walked back out through the front door. Pryor followed, already on his phone. The kitchen was quiet for a moment after they left. Haverfield looked at her documents. Then she looked at Marlene. The 2004 will. Have you had the full German text translated? Not yet. Ralph's colleague is working on it. When you have the translation, I need to see the full text. She paused. If what you've described about the contents is accurate, and from what I've heard this morning I have no reason to doubt it, then Eleanor Voss's estate is substantially more significant than anyone knew when proceedings began. That changes a number of things. The section about compensation for the finder, Marlene said. The will addresses it. Haverfield looked at her steadily. Then we'll need to know exactly what it says. Ralph looked at Marlene with an expression she had not yet seen from him. Not the professional neutral, not the controlled response of a specialist managing a significant discovery. Something else. Something that acknowledged she was sitting at Eleanor Hoffmann's kitchen table, contracted by Gerald Voss for $500 to empty a house that had turned out to be this, and that the distance between those two things was something he understood the weight of. You'll want your own attorney present when the full translation is reviewed, he said. I know. Not Haverfield. She represents the estate. You need someone who represents you. She had not thought about this. She had been thinking about chain of custody and proper process and what Eleanor had wanted done with what she had kept. She had not thought about the fact that she was now a party to proceedings that would eventually involve very large numbers, and that the difference between 15% and somewhat less than 15% was a number she should not navigate without someone sitting beside her who was looking at it from her angle. "I'll make some calls," she said. "Good." Ralph refilled his own coffee. For what it's worth, the 2004 will is explicit. Haverfield recognized the provision immediately. Whatever Gerald Voss's attorney argues, the document is clear. And if they contest it anyway, then it takes longer. But it doesn't change the outcome. He looked at her. "You found this. You documented it correctly. You called the right people. You held the property and kept the chain of custody intact until we got here." He paused. "You did everything right. That matters in these proceedings. It matters that you were scrupulous when it would have been easy not to be." The full translation arrived by email at 4:30 that afternoon, 3 hours after Ralph's colleague in Berlin had started working on it. Ralph read it on his phone at Eleanor's kitchen table, going through it slowly, stopping twice to reread sections. Haverfield read her copy beside him. Marlene sat across the table with her own phone and read the English text that had been rendered from Eleanor Hoffmann's typed German. The will was precise and thorough. It had been drafted with legal expertise, probably by one of the Washington attorneys whose correspondence sat in the fourth envelope. It addressed the collection in full, the inventory of 15 works, each one identified by the same catalog designation as the labels on the storage unit crates. It declared their provenance and history. It established the obligations of the finder regarding restitution proceedings, specifying that any works for which original pre-war owners or their descendants could be identified were to be returned to those parties through the appropriate legal process. For works where original ownership could not be established, the will directed that they be offered to a specified list of institutions. Museums in Germany, Austria, and the United States with documented commitments to Holocaust-era cultural restitution. And then it addressed Marlene, not by name. It could not have addressed her by name. Written in 2004 by a woman who did not know who would find the case or when. It addressed her as the finder, the person who looked carefully, as my father believed someone always would. And it specified, in terms that Haverfield read twice and then set down with the expression of someone who had not expected to encounter a document this carefully constructed in the estate of a woman the town had known as an eccentric recluse, that the finder was to receive 15% of the realized value from any sale of works in the collection, paid from Eleanor Voss's separate financial estate before any other distribution, in recognition of their role in bringing the collection to light and facilitating its proper return to the historical record. Haverfield looked up from her copy. This is a valid testamentary document, subject to authentication and validation proceedings, which will take time, but valid in its form and execution. She paused. 15% is a substantial provision. What does that mean in terms of timeline? Marlene asked. Restitution proceedings typically take 2 to 5 years for complex cases. Authentication of the works themselves will run parallel to the legal process. Sales, where sales are authorized, would occur after restitution obligations are satisfied. Haverfield set her documents together in a careful stack. I would estimate that you are looking at a minimum of 18 months before any distribution could occur. 18 months. The eviction notice was still in the junk drawer. Is there a mechanism for an advance? Marlene said. Against the eventual distribution. Haverfield considered this. The estate has other liquid assets. Eleanor maintained a modest but real financial position. If the 2004 will is validated and its provisions upheld, there is an argument for an interim payment to the finder while the larger process proceeds. She paused. I can't promise anything until the will is validated. I understand. What I can do, Haverfield said, is file immediately to stay any action by Gerald Voss or his attorney pending the validation of the 2004 will. That protects the collection and your position while the process works forward. Ralph was already making calls. Marlene stepped outside onto the front porch. The afternoon had gone cold and clear, the kind of Ohio autumn afternoon that had no sympathy for the temperature of what was happening inside. She called Diane. Her sister answered on the third ring. I was just going to call you. Paulette said you've been gone since Saturday. Are you okay? I'm fine. She sat down on the porch steps. I need to tell you something about the job. She told her. Not all of it. Not the details of the legal proceedings or the specific artists or the precise numbers, because those were not hers to broadcast before the process was properly underway. but the shape of it. An old woman who came from Leipzig in 1938. Her father who ran a gallery. What he had saved and what she had carried across the ocean. 15 works of art in a storage unit on Route 16 East in Carver's Mill, Ohio. A will in a steel case under a bed. Diane was quiet through all of it. When Marlene finished, her sister said, "A storage unit. For 30 years. And you found it because you look at things." "Because I look at things." I said on that voicemail that the logic didn't make sense. "I know. Estate clearance." I said you had a master's degree and the job didn't make sense. Diane paused. "I have been saying some version of that for 11 years. You weren't wrong about the job. You were wrong about the why." The pause that followed was long enough that Marlene thought Diane was going to say something that needed taking back. Instead, her sister said, "I don't know how you do it." "Yes, you do. I know the how. I never understood the why." Marlene looked at the Japanese maple. "Because the things people leave behind matter. Because the lives that look small from outside are usually full of something that only shows if you look carefully." She paused. Eleanor Voss sorted her twist ties by color and polished 43 pairs of the same shoe and crossed off her appointments on a calendar from 2019 and spent 68 years keeping her father's gallery alive in a storage unit in Licking County, Ohio. She wasn't eccentric. She was extraordinary. Diane was quiet for a moment. "Marlene." "Yes. I'm sorry I said what I said on the voicemail. You were looking at a different part of it. You weren't wrong about the $500. The $500. Her sister laughed once, a short sound. "Is the $500 still the number we're talking about?" "No," Marlene said. "It's not." Ray Tillman came by at 5. She had seen him pass the house twice during the afternoon and knew he would eventually stop. He knocked at the front door with his knit cap in his hands, which meant he already knew something was happening because he had seen the cars in the driveway. She brought him into the kitchen. Ralph and Greaves had gone back to the storage unit with additional equipment. Haverfield had returned to Columbus to begin the filing she had described. The house was quiet. She told Ray Tillman who Eleanor Voss had been. He sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and listened the way a man listened who had lived long enough to understand that the world always had more in it than you thought. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The man in the blue car," he said. "The one who came that time and left carrying nothing. Probably one of the Washington attorneys," Marlene said. "Someone who came to review the collection in person before advising her on the legal steps." "She passed that test," he said. "She passed it every time." Ray Tillman looked at the table, at the gallery photographs still spread across it, the interior shots of the Nicolaystrasse gallery with its packed walls and its 2 clients in their interwar clothes. He reached out and touched one of the photographs at the corner, very lightly, with one rough finger. "She cried at her desk," he said. "That time I walked past. I know. I thought it was loneliness." He looked up. "But she wasn't lonely in the way I thought. She had all of this." He gestured at the photographs, at the house. She had her father and his gallery and all the people in those paintings. She had more company than most of us. Marlene thought about that. She thought it was true. The authentication process formally opened the following week. A team from the Holocaust Art Restitution Project arrived in Carver's Mill with equipment that transformed the back bedrooms of the house on Sycamore Lane into a temporary examination studio. The works were brought from the storage unit one at a time, examined under laboratory-grade lighting, documented with spectroscopic imaging and X-ray analysis that could read the underdrawings beneath the paint layer and confirm the material composition of the pigments and the aging characteristics of the varnish. Greaves stayed for the full week. The process had a rhythm she came to understand by the second day. Each work was unwrapped and placed on the examination table in a specific sequence of light conditions. The team photographed it in full-spectrum light first, then under ultraviolet, then under infrared. They made notes in a running log and consulted the April 1956 inventory list that Ralph's Berlin colleague had fully translated, matching each work against its catalog entry, its dimensions, its medium, its condition notes as recorded by whoever had written the inventory 68 years ago. The handwriting in the inventory, Ralph's colleague had noted, was not Eleanor's. It was her father's. Samuel Hoffmann had written down every work in April 1956, had cataloged each one with the thoroughness of a man who spent 30 years managing objects for other people and understood that a record was the difference between a thing that existed and a thing that could be proven to have existed. He had written the inventory in the spring of the year his daughter crossed the ocean, and she had carried it across with the works themselves, and it sat now in a translated document on Ralph's laptop beside every work it described. Samuel Hoffmann's catalog matched what Eleanor Hoffmann had kept, every single entry. By the end of the first day, 2 of the 15 works had been provisionally confirmed as genuine by the initial examination team. By the end of the week, 9 had been provisionally confirmed. The remaining 6 required additional analysis that would be conducted at a facility in Washington. The panel painting from the east wall was the last to be examined, and its examination took the longest. The lead authentication specialist, a woman who had spent 20 years working with works from exactly this period and this school, spent 4 hours with it under the lights before she set down her instruments and said what everyone in the room had been waiting to hear confirmed. Marlene was not in the room when she said it. She was downstairs in Eleanor's kitchen, making coffee, when Ralph came down the stairs and stood in the doorway. "Confirmed," he said. She poured the coffee. "The panel work alone," he said, "based on comparable recent sales and current market assessment, will carry an estimated auction value of somewhere between $45 and $65 million. She set the pot down. She thought about the eviction notice in the junk drawer in her apartment in Columbus, about the $42 in her checking account as of last Thursday night, about Jasmine making do with frozen waffles and Marcus eating cereal for dinner, and the fan that rattled on her old laptop, and the car payment she had deferred twice. She thought about 15%. She looked at the kitchen wall. The 2019 calendar was still there, its crossed-off appointments running to December of a year 4 years past, each one a day that Eleanor Hoffmann had navigated carefully, one at a time, with everything she was carrying. "What happens now?" she said. "Restitution proceedings begin. We identify the original collectors who purchased these works from the Hoffmann Gallery, or their descendants. Where original ownership can be established, the works go back. Where it cannot, they go to the institutions named in the will." Ralph came fully into the kitchen and accepted the coffee she offered. "The process takes time, but the 2004 will is now validated. It was filed with the court 2 days ago. Haverfield is moving on the interim payment provision. Gerald, his attorney, has indicated they will not contest the restitution proceedings." Ralph set his cup down. "The international legal framework on this is not ambiguous. Gerald Voss has a claim to Eleanor's financial estate, which is modest, and to the house and its conventional contents. He has no claim to the collection under the Washington Principles or under the valid 2004 will." A pause. His attorney understood that quickly once they had the full documentation. Gerald himself took a little longer. Marlene thought about Gerald standing in the living room, saying she never said anything. The genuine bewilderment in his voice under the calculation. The man had lost something he hadn't known he had, which was different from simply being denied something he had planned for. "He should know who she was," Marlene said. "He's the only family she had. He should know who his aunt was." Ralph looked at her for a moment. "That's generous. It's accurate." She paused. "He doesn't have a claim to the art. He has a claim to understanding where it came from. Those are different things." She called Gerald Voss 2 days later, not to negotiate or explain or make peace, to tell him what she had told Ray Tillman, who Eleanor Voss had been, who Samuel Hoffmann had been, what the gallery on the Nicolaystrasse had meant, what 68 years of keeping a secret in a small Ohio town had cost. He listened without interrupting, which surprised her. When she finished, he said, "She could have told me. At some point. She could have said something. She could have. She chose not to." Marlene was in her van, in the parking lot of the Secure store on Route 16 East, watching the light change on the farm fields behind the chain-link fence. I don't think she was sure she could trust the information to someone she'd met twice. And by the time she might have been sure, the habit of keeping it was the most permanent thing about her. A long pause. "She was my mother's cousin," Gerald said. "I barely knew my mother's side. There were reasons for that, family reasons, old arguments I was never told the details of." He paused. "I thought the house would clear for $80,000, and I'd put it into the market and not think about it again. I know. What happens to the money? The sale proceeds. Most of it goes to the people who are owed it. The original collectors' families. The institutions named in the will." She paused. A portion goes to whoever found it. You. Me. Another pause. Was there a lot? There was a lot. She drove back to Columbus the following morning, which was a Saturday. She left the house on Sycamore Lane locked, the case in her van, the east wall panel closed over an empty space where the wooden box no longer sat. She had given Ralph a key. Haverfield had another. The house would remain undisturbed until the estate proceedings were finalized. She drove the 2 hours on 70 West with the sun behind her, and the fields opening flat and wide on either side, and the radio playing something she did not listen to. She stopped at the grocery store before she went home. Bought the things she had not been buying when she was watching the number in her checking account. Chicken that did not need defrosting. Good bread. Things for lunches that were not frozen waffles. A small piece of fruit cake for no reason except that it was in the display case near the register and Marcus had mentioned fruit cake in September and she had said maybe later. She carried the bags up the stairs to the apartment. Jasmine met her at the door. She had the expression she had been wearing for the past 2 weeks. The 15-year-old version of holding everything together, the face that had been managing the household in her mother's absence with the efficiency of someone who had been watching Marlene manage things for years and had absorbed more than either of them knew. "You're home," Jasmine said. "I'm home. You were gone for a week." "I know." Marcus came running from the back of the apartment, 8 years old and all forward momentum, and wrapped himself around her waist in the way he had been doing since he was 3. She held him with one arm and kept the grocery bag in the other. "You were gone for so long," he said into her jacket. "I know. I'm sorry." She got the groceries into the kitchen and made dinner, a real dinner, the first one in longer than she wanted to think about. While she cooked, Jasmine sat at the kitchen table and watched her in the way she had been watching her since the first call from Carver's Mill, reading her mother the way her mother read houses. "Tell me," Jasmine said. She told her. Not the numbers, not yet, because the numbers were 18 months away at minimum, and because she was 41 years old, and she understood that things that were not yet in her hands were not yet real enough to tell a 15-year-old. But the shape of it. The old woman in the small Ohio town. The father who ran a gallery. What he had saved. The case under the bed. The barrel lock and the 40 minutes it took to open it. The letter addressed to the one who finds this. Jasmine listened the way she listened to things that mattered, without interrupting, without reaching for her phone. When Marlene finished, her daughter was quiet for a moment. "She was waiting for you specifically. She was waiting for whoever looked carefully." "That's you." Marlene did not argue with this. "Are we going to be okay?" Jasmine asked. Not the version of the question she had asked on the phone from Carver's Mill, not the careful teenager's formulation. The real question, the one that had been behind every crossed-off entry on the eviction notice calendar for the past 11 days. Marlene set the spoon down and looked at her daughter. "Yes," she said. "We are going to be okay." She paid the rent the next morning, in full, with late fees. She called Gerald Fitch and listened to his 12 seconds of apology without comment. She paid the car payment she had deferred. She bought the replacement laptop, the one that did not require the cord to be held at the exact right angle. These were small things. They were also not small at all. The interim payment, when it came 6 weeks later, was enough to stop the particular kind of breath-holding she had been doing since long before she knew it had a name. Not the final amount, not the 15% of whatever the collection eventually realized, but enough. Haverfield had moved the court faster than she had initially indicated was possible, which Marlene suspected had something to do with the fact that the 2004 will was unusually clear and Gerald Voss's attorney had concluded that contesting it would cost more than the modest financial estate he stood to inherit under the original proceedings. The formal authentication of the full collection was completed 5 months after Marlene first pulled back the bed skirt in the master bedroom of the house on Sycamore Lane and found the green steel case pushed against the wall. All 15 works were confirmed genuine. In the months of the authentication process, 9 of the 15 works were matched to original purchasers from Samuel Hoffmann's gallery records. 4 of those 9 were traced to families who had descendants still living, families in Germany, France, and the United States who had spent decades aware that their grandparents or great-grandparents had purchased works from a Leipzig gallery in the 1920s and 30s and who had never expected to see those works again. Ralph handled those contacts personally. Marlene was not present for them. She did not need to be. The 5 works without traceable original ownership, including the panel painting from the east wall, would be sold at auction and the proceeds distributed as the 2004 will specified, to Holocaust Memorial Foundations and to the finder. The panel painting from the east wall, the one that had made Ralph go silent and Greaves hold his magnifier perfectly still, and the lead authentication specialist spend 4 hours under the lights before she said what she had to say, was placed by the Holocaust Art Restitution Project as the centerpiece of a formal press announcement about the discovery. The announcement named Samuel Hoffmann, identified the Gallery Hoffmann's historical significance, documented the displacement of the collection in 1938, and described the 68-year stewardship of his daughter Lieselotte Elsa Hoffmann, known in Carver's Mill, Ohio, as Eleanor Voss. The announcement was carried by 3 international wire services and 17 publications in 5 countries. In Carver's Mill, it was front page of the weekly paper for 2 consecutive weeks. Todd from the Secure Store gave one interview, brief, in which he said Eleanor Voss had always paid in January and never been late, and he was glad her things had been taken care of properly. Ray Tillman gave no interview, but he put a small bunch of late-season wildflowers on the front porch of the house on Sycamore Lane on the day the first article appeared, which no one photographed or made note of, and which Marlene found when she came back to Carver's Mill the following week for the formal handover of the collection to the restitution team. She stood on the porch looking at the wildflowers for a moment. Then she let herself into Eleanor's house one last time. The rooms were empty now, the shelves bare, the floors swept. The work she had been contracted to do was done, in the way that contracts described but could not fully account for. The glass birds from the cabinet were in a box that would go to auction for a modest amount. The books were in boxes that would go to a reseller in Columbus. The 43 pairs of shoes had been donated to a women's shelter in Newark. The coffee can of twist ties, still sorted by color, she had kept. She was not sure why. It was not valuable, and she had not been directed to keep it. But she had held it in her hands one afternoon in Eleanor's kitchen and understood that she was not ready to throw it away. And so it sat on her kitchen counter in Columbus, and she looked at it sometimes when she was standing at the sink, at the red ones on the left, and the white ones in the center, and the blue ones on the right. She walked through the empty rooms and up the stairs and into the back bedroom. The east wall was still there, the panel closed and repapered, the room empty of everything it had held. She stood in front of it with her hand flat against the wallpaper, over the place where the lined wooden recess had been. She thought about Samuel Hoffmann. She thought about a man who had spent 30 years building something that mattered, representing artists he believed in, building a gallery that stood on the Nikolastrasse from 1899 to 1938, and who had seen what was coming and moved what he could before it arrived, who had died in their Scienstadt in 1944 not knowing if any of it had survived, not knowing if his daughter had made it to America, not knowing if what he had given her to carry would ever reach the people it was meant to reach or the walls it was meant to hang on. He had sent it forward anyway. He had written it all down in April 1956 and given the document to his daughter with the objects, trusting that what he had built was worth the faith of a man who might not survive to see whether that faith was warranted. It had been warranted. Marlene stood with her hand against the east wall of a house in Carver's Mill, Ohio, and thought. He would not know her name. He had died in 1944. He had not known about Marlene Okafor or the lock-picking set or the 40 minutes on the bedroom floor or the photograph of the signature enlarged on a phone screen in bad light. He had not known about the barrel lock or the twist ties or the 43 pairs of identical shoes or the coffee can or Ray Tillman or the man in the blue car who came for 45 minutes and left carrying nothing. He had known that his daughter would carry what he gave her as far as she could carry it. And he had known, or had believed with the faith of a man who spent his life understanding the value of things, that eventually the right person would look carefully. She took her hand away from the wall. She went downstairs. She picked up the bunch of wildflowers from the front porch and brought them inside and put them in a glass of water on the kitchen counter. Then she went out to her van, started the engine, and drove west toward Columbus in the afternoon light, carrying the coffee can of twist ties on the passenger seat beside her, the red ones on the left, and the white ones in the center, and the blue ones on the right. She drove the whole 2 hours without the radio. She had done enough listening. She thought about Samuel Hoffmann and his daughter and a gallery on the Nikolastrasse and 43 pairs of shoes and a barrel lock on a green steel case, and the particular quality of faith required to seal something in an envelope addressed to the one who finds this, and then go on living your life, crossing off appointments, sorting the twist ties, keeping the temperature at 65 degrees in January. The fields on either side of 70 West went flat and wide under the afternoon light. Ohio in November. She had driven this road many times and never thought of it as beautiful, and she was thinking of it as beautiful now, which was not the road's doing but hers. She would tell Marcus about it someday. Not the money, not yet, but the story. A girl who crossed the ocean carrying her father's faith in a steel case. He was 8, and he would understand the part about the locked box and the key, which was the part that mattered most. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.